Utilizing language acquisition theory. So the three language acquisition theories we're going to talk about today are Skinner's theory of behaviorism, Chomsky's universal grammar, and Krashen's monitor model. So our setting and content area is high school setting, a social studies classroom. We're specifically going to focus on content from a world history class. The content is the age of European exploration. This is a very popular topic with our sophomores and freshmen. First, we're going to start with Skinner's theory of behaviorism. The rat, he will press lever for food. Well, why is that? Well, it's because Skinner's theory of behaviorism focuses on language acquisition as operant conditioning. So we've all heard of operant conditioning. We've all heard of classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is the Pavlov dog theory, where Pavlov gave the dog meat and rang a bell and kept doing that, and then one day he rang the bell, didn't give the dog meat, but the dog continued to salivate anyway. That's classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is a little bit different. The rat here has learned through behavior, through his own behaviors, through rewards and punishments, that when he presses that lever, food comes out. What Skinner's theory of behaviorism is mainly focused on is reinforcement. We want to be reinforcing language on our students and having them practice it constantly. Through those behaviors and the reward and punishment, in a broad sense of the term, rewards and punishments, students' language will develop over time as we reward them and encourage them through their language acquisition process. Skinner's theory also is an application over memorization principle. So we want to be applying language, not just memorizing language. So we can memorize words, but we also need to know when and how to use them, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Applying Skinner in the classroom. So vocabulary acquisition should be application and not just memorization, like I just said. We want to teach these things using writing and explanatory methods. In social studies, that's very important because in our content area, we're doing a lot of argumentative writing and concluding, and we want to be able to use social studies vocabulary in the correct way. Students need to know how and when, not just what words mean. How and when to use them, not just what they are. So for this example, from our curriculum, step 1 is introducing the word. So I chose the word mercantilism. In this step, we're going to introduce the word. We're going to have the student repeat the word. It's broken down there into different syllables, so they can understand the English way of saying this word, developing that language, developing the way of saying words. Step 2 will define the word. So an economic system designed to increase a nation's wealth through government regulation of the nation's commerce. So what we have done here is step 1 and 2. We've defined the word. We've done the what is mercantilism. Step 3, we're going to take it a step further. So now we're going to apply that word. We're going to apply it to content. We're going to apply it to an argumentative or a factual type of sentence. So something a student may write is, an economic theory called mercantilism became popular in Europe during the Age of Exploration because it called for strengthened commerce and centralized governments. So now we've gone to the third step here, applying that application over memorization. Step 2 is memorizing, step 3 is application. Students know how and when to use this word in a sentence and to explain it, not just what that word means. Next, we're going to go to Chomsky's universal grammar. Dad says, hey, I selected Spanish. Now see if you can figure out how to withdraw your allowance from the ATM here. This is how you motivate your kid to learn a second language. So, contrary to Skinner's beliefs that, behavior we have to learn through punishment and reward, that language is a basic, that it's not a basic instinct, Chomsky says it is. It's hardwired into our brains. Dovey says we are all what Chomsky means is we all are born with a fundamental understanding of the underlying mechanisms of language. To clarify, it doesn't mean that when we're born, we know we're going to speak English, we know we're going to speak Spanish, we know we're going to speak German, Italian, Chinese, Mandarin, whatever. It means that we were born with the ability to do this. So we are naturally hardwired to have the development of language, no matter what that language is. Skinner doesn't believe that. So this is where Chomsky and Skinner kind of differ. Chomsky is focused on observing and memorizing grammatical cues. That is how you are going to process language, is by observing and memorizing these grammatical cues. And we'll see here, I like to do that in social studies with visuals and writing. So using Chomsky's universal grammar in the classroom, here we took a English word of maritime and translated to Spanish as maritimo, which my Spanish-speaking students had to teach me how to say. I probably still did not say it correctly. But here we are going to recognize that the English version is very similar to the Spanish version, but that the E and the O have changed, and also the pronunciation. But what we have underneath is a couple of pictures, and we'll get into that in just a second. So what we want to do is connect grammar, our new vocabulary here, and new language with visuals. So students are utilizing their first language and converting that to a second language, in this case English. So maritimo goes to maritime, and we're going to show them pictures of what this connection is. So on the left we have a cargo ship that's carrying its load, and on the right we have a Coast Guard vessel. These are two examples of maritime events. We want to have students make that connection. So we want to introduce the English word and connect it to the Spanish word and show them that visual, as I just said. Or even if you take away the English word and you present the Spanish word translated, have them explain what they're seeing in the visuals. We're seeing a cargo ship that's shipping goods to another country. Or on the right, we see a military vessel, French Coast Guard. If you want to look at the flag there, I'm guessing it's the French Coast Guard, doing patrol. Those are maritime events. So making that connection with what we already have, our previous knowledge in our head. Chomsky's universal grammar is also grammar-based construction in the processing of language. So we want to take small bits of grammar and construct bigger pieces of language to broaden our understanding and our growth of knowledge in that second language. Lastly, Krashen's monitor model. So this is built around a set of 5 hypotheses. First one is acquisition learning, which is very, it ties in, we didn't talk about Chomsky's language acquisition device, but it's subconscious learning. And this has been disproven by researchers, but it's been re-researched and it's been proven again. So there's a lot of debate on this subject, but the overall consensus is not to use acquisition learning hypothesis in your classroom. There's a few more coming up here that are better options from Krashen's monitor model. So the monitor hypothesis, it's closely monitoring the output. So what are the students closely monitoring how our students are progressing through language. But we don't want to be overbearing. We don't want to be constantly correcting them. We want to build self-efficacy and give them the confidence to learn their new language and give them the tools to connect their L1 and previous knowledge to their L2. Input, very simple. We want to give easily comprehensible input as educators. We don't want to be too overbearing. We don't want to be confusing about the language we use. We want to use simple terms, simple definitions, simple connections. It's that easy. Natural order hypothesis. So this is a pretty simple hypothesis. Is that there's a natural progression from the student's first language to their second language, and this will be facilitated over time. But there are different time frames for different types of students. When we get into how to apply this to the classroom, I will talk more about the natural order hypothesis and how we need to give different students with different abilities different time frames for language acquisition. Lastly, effective filter. So this is not so much instructional. This is more classroom management wise. It's mental filters that get in the way of language acquisition. So if we're creating a stressful, high intensity learning environment, it's probably going to cut the motivation of our kids. They're going to think that they can't do this, that it's too hard, and break down mentally. And I think this is a very important hypothesis because we want to motivate our students, tell them that they can do this, that they're going to connect their L1 to their L2, that it's something that just takes time, and really build a positive learning environment for this type of model. So utilizing Crash in the classroom, here we go with the monitor model. It's a lot of observation and application. So we want to teach writing skills. Writing skills are going to be important because it gives students that connection to language. It's not just hearing and speaking, but writing and that visual aspect really applies language, especially when we talk about linguistics and saying words and understanding how words are written and processing when we read. Give that constant feedback. Give it consistently and constantly. Again, not overbearing. I know that sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but we want to give positive feedback, and we want to give feedback when it's needed. If a student's struggling, we want to encourage them to try and figure it out themselves. But if they're really stuck in a rut, give that feedback, give that input, provide good input on how they should be saying things if they're really struggling, but really try and get them to get to that level. We don't need to intervene so much in Krashen's model. Like I said, reduce the intervention, allow self-efficacy. I could beat a dead horse with that all day. It's really important that we don't intervene, but that we monitor and we listen and observe to how our students are progressing and help when needed. And then, like I said, different pacing for different students. In my classroom, we have all different proficiencies of English speakers. I have students who have been speaking English since birth. I've had students who have been speaking English for the last year. So really utilizing our observation skills and Krashen's model and his hypothesis to really understand where our students are coming from, how long it's going to take them to acquire new language skills, what we can do to speed up the process. Utilize highly proficient students to help lower proficient students. That's going to help their pacing and language acquisition. But we really need to understand that there's different pacing for different levels and different types of students. Here's a reference page for what I use for some of the information in this presentation, and photos are courtesy of Google search.